We're set to go. Thanks everyone online for being patient. I'm Ken Lee again. I think some of you online probably missed the bio or the introduction. It's okay. I was going to do a self-introduction anyway. I'm the Vice President of Development for Pacific Plaza Premier Development Group. We are a small but very fast growing development group that is based in Alhambra. My boss is James Chow. He's the president of our company. James, some of you probably also know him. He also happens to be one of the two owners, along with Shumei Cam, of Coldwell Banker George Realty, which is why we share the building with them. And so we've been in that office, I was just sharing, for about 4 years now. I actually met James in 2013 for the very first time when I was a community and economic development director for the city of Irwin. So I have kind of an unusual past history. I'm not your prototypical developer where I came up in the development world or the development finance world, et cetera. I actually started my career off in local government, working for counties, cities, and then I transitioned into, you guys can hear me okay, right? Okay, I think I'm talking loud enough. And then I transitioned into private consulting. And I work for a number of cities and developers and nonprofits, even up and down the state. I'm going to actually talk about a topic that you're probably not used to hearing too much about, which is economic development. But I specifically want to address this audience because you all play such an important role in community and economic development. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining what economic development is, and then explaining really your role in that and how influential you are and can be in promoting economic development. So a little bit of more background about the company itself. We've been around for only about 10 years or so, but it's a combined real estate experience of 40 plus years. James Chow has been doing real estate since the 80s. And so we're a small group that relies heavily on expert professionals like our architects, engineers, other consultants to make our projects go forward. What we really do pride ourselves on is not just getting projects approved, but actually building them. I think you all have seen many projects around San Gabriel Valley get approved, but then nothing happens. One of the projects that's in San Gabriel, just down the street from here, which is the old growing grounds of the San Gabriel Nursery and Florist. This is about a 6-acre property. This is our biggest project. It's one of the last large developable parcels in West San Gabriel Valley. We are about, some of you are at the groundbreaking ceremony, but we are about to actually break ground, hopefully next week, weather permitting. There are 3 other projects that are large scale around us that have all been entitled and approved by the city, but nothing's happening. And that's just a fact and a function of what's happening right now from the finance side, along with some other factors. I just came from a San Gabriel Valley economic forecast that was held at Diamond Bar Community Center. It was put on by the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership, which I'm a board member of. I just launched out with a co-chair. So I'm a co-chair of their new economic development committee. This was a very eye-opening forecast when they're talking about the national economy, the state economy, the San Gabriel Valley economy, the local economy. And you see a panic button here, and it says, "Don't panic," in parentheses, yet. So I will share with you that as I was presenting my slides also last week, this was before the big news that we all heard about 3-4 days ago, which is what? Silicon Valley Bank collapse, right? And so there's a lot of, I'm not going to say frantic, but nervous people right now, including us. Okay, we don't know really what the ripple effect is going to be of what actually occurred with Silicon Valley Bank, but it was helpful to hear, particularly the speaker from Bank of America, who has tracked really what's going on. And this was really about deposit funds and how banks manage them. Okay, I'm not going to go into all that detail because I'm not an economist, I'm not a banker, but it was reassuring to at least hear that what happened with Silicon Valley Bank is not indicative of every other bank necessarily, even regional banks. but I hear there's also some nervous energy right now. There's some chatter about East-West Bank, et cetera. So, I just want to say that there's a lot of dynamics happening in our economy. The last time I was here actually speaking, I was talking about how we have to confront but push through some challenges in terms of economic uncertainties, supply chain issues, labor shortages, material increases, cost increases. But that's just the volatility and the nature of today's market, right? And so we all have to live in that. You all have to live in it on a day-to-day basis on the transactional side as well. So, and we'll talk a little bit about what it means to have economic resilience also. But a little bit more about the company. So right now we have 9 projects in West San Gabriel Valley, so south of the 210, west of the 605, around the 10 and up and below it, as well as east of the 710. And so West San Gabriel Valley really is our sandbox. This is our playground. We focus heavily in this area. We understand the demographics. We know location-wise where we want to be. 3 of these projects have been completed. 3 are under construction right now. We're about to break ground on the big one in St. Gabriel. We have 1 other that's been approved in Temple City. And then we have a new acquisition in Monterey Park, which is just actually 60 feet north of our other project in Monterey Park. And so, these projects range in size. The smallest is just kind of an offshoot of one of our projects, which is only 10 units in size, but it goes all the way up to 251 units, which is a San Gabriel project at the old nursery property. So just kind of a quick snapshot, and you'll see this again a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, we build predominantly, primarily mixed use projects. So retail with residential above. And last time I shared with you all a little bit why we're shifting or pivoting, moving away from for sale condos as our primary business model toward apartments. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have such a strong rental market in the San Gabriel Valley. Home ownership, however, is still a very important aspect of our housing crisis, which is very, very relevant right now. And it does affect everything from the economy and forecasted to where jobs are located. And so, our hope is that we're helping build communities by actually creating denser housing within our commercial corridors, because guess what? They're projecting that California needs to build basically 250,000 dwelling units per year to keep up with the forecasted population increase in demand. Okay, where's all that going to go, right? Especially when you talk about 80,000 units in San Gabriel Valley alone, we're landlocked, right? And so there's not a lot of vacant land like in the Empire or other parts of California where you have land that's converting from agricultural to housing. And so we have to go up. There's no other way. We have to densify our commercial corridors, and which also is related to affordability of housing. The more dense the housing is, the more affordable the housing is. And so that's why our product types are really focused in these areas. Obviously, school districts, everything that you guys are all focused on is where we also focus in terms of where we locate. But we are continuing to look for additional properties, but it is getting harder because there's just not a lot of land in San Gabriel Valley that's developable. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what economic development is, what it's not, and why should anyone actually care, right? And so, there's a lot of different definitions that get thrown around for economic development. It depends who you're talking to. It's very subjective in some ways, but it is a very real field of expertise at the national level, at the state level, at the regional level, at the local level. I'll go into a little bit of that. So, and again, a little bit, on my background around economic development, that was predominantly what I did when I was in city government. Why is that important? Because cities really should be leading the charge in economic development, but they can't do it alone. So what I'm here to talk about is your role in partnering with cities, helping shape policy, helping shape their direction, because it affects your industry, our industry of real estate at the end of the day. All right, I'm just going to throw out these definitions of economic development. And I'll give a little bit of color to it. Okay, so CalEd is a California Association for Local Economic Development. Great organization. They're very active both at the state level and regionally. Their definition of economic development on their website is economic development is a creation of wealth from which community benefits are realized. It is more than a jobs program. It's an investment in growing your economy and enhancing the prosperity and quality of life for all residents. Okay, now I've kind of become friends with the CalEd executive director, so this is not to speak disparagingly, but that's a great definition. It's a little like vanilla ice cream. It's a little vanilla, right? A little bland. I mean, it sounds good, but it doesn't really mean that much when we talk about how that impacts us in our industries on the ground. Let me give you another definition. This is from the Economic Development Handbook that CalEd also sponsors. From a public perspective, so like from cities, counties, et cetera, local economic development involves the allocation of limited resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship in a way that has a positive effect on the level of business activity, employment, income distribution patterns, and fiscal solvency. Okay, so if the last ice cream was like generic vanilla ice cream, at least this is a little bit more like Haagen-Dazs. Okay, so a little bit more flavor, right? And it talks about, right, the allocation of resources, which are assets that have to be leveraged for the economy, for changes in the economy, et cetera. And again, that is from a public perspective because cities really should be leading the charge on this. All right, this was actually my definition. So of course it'll be the best definition. Local economic development is a proactive intervention, collaborative leveraging of assets and investment by public, private, community partners to strategically influence the course of the local economy towards greater prosperity and resiliency. So if the other two were kind of like vanilla ice cream, this is so boom chakalaka, right? So let me explain a little bit why. Let me go back. Okay, so there's some key words here, right? Proactive being obviously one of them, collaborative being another. Okay, economic development, how the economy changes at the local level, can't happen by one party doing it alone. It has to have partners, community partners, public, private partners, right? Much too often, and this is me, a former city guy saying this, much too often, cities don't invite the private sector into their decision-making, right? By far, they assume that they know what's happening on the ground and they make decisions based on assumptions, okay? But a lot of times, their assumptions are not fact-checked, right? And so I'm gonna say this several times throughout this, right? This is where realtors, agents, right, commercial brokers, I say this in every committee I'm involved in, okay? So I sit on that board. I co-chair also the Alhambra Land Use and Economic Development Committee. And I always say that we need to rely on our brokers because they actually have the pulse of what's happening in the market. They have the pulse of landlords, tenants. They know where the market's shifting, right? Both on commercial and residential. And so we should be inviting them into the conversation, okay? That's the first time I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say that a couple more times. But the other part around this is the word intervention, okay? So if you think about in financial or economic sort of trajectory, where is the economy going, right? What is that based on? What markets, what trades, what industries is that based on? What's happening in the market that allows us to have economic growth? I can guarantee you, it's like law of diminishing return, that if nothing changes, that will eventually go into decline. Always, right? So what does that mean? That means we have to have the ability to at least forecast to some degree, where is the economy going? What are happening in terms of industry trends, right? I did a project for the city of Carlsbad a long time ago, where they were trying to forecast, for their land use planning, what was going to happen economically. And one of the things that, normally market studies do is put numbers. You just throw out numbers, right? Blah, 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 blah. What we did was a little bit different. We actually interviewed folks that were in high employment industries, trying to understand where changes in their local economy were going to not just affect what happens to their economy and the city's budget, but also what happens in terms of real estate, demand for land, right? And so one of the most obvious things that was occurring right around that time is that Carlsbad was sort of a little mecca of golf. They had tailor-made, you know, a lot of the big golf names had their manufacturing headquarters in Carlsbad. Guess what? They all left. They all went down to Mexico, cheaper labor. It just made a lot more sense, right? And so that's just one aspect. There's shifts in the market that will impact what happens from a real estate standpoint, but also in terms of jobs and economy, the overall big picture. If the cities and us as their partners don't get ahead of these things, then automatically we are going to go into a state of decline and we become very reactive, right? Much like we had to react to the pandemic, right? Much like folks are worried about reacting to what's happening in the baking industry, okay? And so, you know, even the forecast this morning, there were other aspects that were both good news and, you know, bad news, right? So they are expecting, some of you may have heard, that the Feds are looking at possibly, and they're projecting this, 3 more hikes, quarter percent hikes, right? And that the B of A speaker was projecting also that, you know, the big question is, are we expecting to hit a recession in the coming year? How many of you think we're going to hit a recession? Okay, yeah. So they're saying that probably in the 3rd or 4th quarter of this year, we'll see a recession, but it's not going to be like the last Great Recession. That it'll be a short and shallow recession, were the words that they used. Why? Because it's not impacting kind of like the general population, right? From what we saw with the last Great Recession. It is impacting companies and what happens from a cash flow standpoint, and it will trickle down and affect us, but not like before. All right, I just wanted to share that. So one of the other terms that gets used for economic development in the past is economic gardening. So I'm just trying to kind of shift your thinking that much like a gardener, what you're doing is you got to prepare good soil, right? Which is the #1 thing. If you don't have good soil, right, your plants are not going to grow. You can plant as many seeds as you want. You can try to water them, but they ain't going to grow, probably going to die and wither away. And so when we think about making sure we have good soil from an economic development perspective, you know, you have to understand from your community to the next community what makes it tick in terms of its economy, its market, right? Because I can guarantee you there are major clusters of businesses or industries that make every community tick, right? And so what makes Anaheim tick? This is very obvious. Disneyland, right? It's tourism, hospitality. Look at all the hotels on the 5 freeway, right? that just like they sprouted up. It was crazy. And then, of course, they sprouted up right before the pandemic. But you know, that you get what I'm saying, right? When we look at every community, there's a sort of a DNA, right? A genetic makeup to how those communities tick. In the San Gabriel Valley, West San Gabriel Valley, small business is very, very important, obviously, but we also have employers here, healthcare, right? And these are the things that we have to understand about the markets and the economies that we're working in. A little bit of history on economic development. Let me do a time check. Okay, I'm good. So I was just talking to Buck earlier about redevelopment. Redevelopment agencies were created back in 1945. Okay, this is government lingo, talk, etc. But they were very, very important for California. It actually distinguished California from most other states because California had redevelopment agencies. Redevelopment agencies had specific powers, like, and this sounds like a bad word, eminent domain, right? So redevelopment agency, it could actually go in, take underutilized property, pay fair market value to the owners, relocate them if there's businesses, pay goodwill, all that stuff, and then they would leverage that land for projects, right? So when we talk about scarcity of land, you know what one of the hardest things to do is for a developer? Assemble property. If I'm trying to assemble like 6 parcels to make a project, this is very, very difficult. I'm dealing with 6 different owners. I'm maybe dealing with a land trust or a family trust, very difficult. And so redevelopment agencies had both financing powers, but also other powers like eminent domain. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but obviously 1978, Prop 13 was very important. It capped property tax, as you all know, to 1%, right? Which triggered what? Cities' reliance on sales tax dollars, which, you know, back in the days, we used to call it fiscalization of land use. Fancy term for saying cities want sales tax. They want Targets, they want Costco's, they want big box, even though big box is now dying. And so you understand all these trends in the market, as even the pandemic, as we were all on Zoom and everybody was joking during the last session, you always had 2 windows up. You had your Zoom window, turn your camera off, and then you're on Amazon actually shopping. Right? So, I mean, it really is shifting how the economy is starting to work here, right? And so, you know, we hit the Great Recession, and then in 2011, there was legislation followed by a lawsuit and a Supreme Court decision that effectively wiped out all 400 redevelopment agencies in the state of California. Okay, why am I sharing all this? Because before, cities relied on economic development, cities relied on redevelopment agency funding, the money to do economic development. When it died, a lot of people lost their jobs actually, because the cities didn't have the money that they were getting before to fund those positions. And so the field or industry of economic development has shifted, right? What we're hoping is that there's a revival around economic development. So again, I'm not your prototypical developer. I don't usually run around, you know, developers don't run around talking about economic development, but it's important to me because if cities are doing economic development well, and I'm working with them, I'm partnering with them, I'm working with brokers, right? That means that there's transactional capital happening, right? There's leveraging of assets. That means that property owners who may be absentee, who don't care, that are sitting on land that can be developed, they wake up, right? They all of a sudden understand the value of their property, but collectively, everybody understands the value of having a not just robust economy, but a more resilient economy to move forward, right? That way we can weather the storm, such as a recession or a pandemic, et cetera. And of course, the pandemic was important, right? Because, you know, redevelopment and the death of redevelopment and pandemic, it has really shifted our views and how we behave also, but it's also shifted how we look at traditional retail. It has shifted work from home, which affects what's happening in the rental market. All these things are relevant as far as what's happening at a global context, but how it lands home for us locally and in our jobs and our industries. You guys following me so far? So who cares? Like economic development, right? Such a like lofty concept, but everybody cares, right? There are global organizations like the International Economic Development at the federal level or national level, the state governor's office of business and economic development. At the super regional level, there's the Southern California Association of Governments. At the regional level or the county level, like County of Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation, LAEDC, and then sub-regional like San Gabriel Valley, right? You have the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership. You've got the COG, which is a Council of Governments here. And then locally, and this was a presentation I was doing with Alhambra, your cities also have chambers of commerce, downtown associations, right, to groups like this. And I say that because it's very important, because you have a sub-regional, you know, association of realtors. That's very, very important. Your voice can be very loud, actually. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how this association, but how you individually can get more involved to try to help push forward an agenda around economic development. But this looks really busy and complicated. I'm going to boil it down, okay? So when economic developers, all right, whether it's city or city and private, when they're intervening, like I said, right, and trying to shift the market, they attract certain businesses, they focus on retaining certain businesses that are otherwise going to leave their city, their region, their state, which we've all seen, right? Go to Arizona, Texas, Florida, wherever they're going, right? When they intervene, you have business success, growth, etc. Why is that important for cities? Guess what? That's tax dollars. That's how they fund services that are essential for the residents, for the businesses, right? So I'm talking about parks, roads, police, fire, housing money, and just general quality of life, right? But that's also how they fund their staffing. So, this is why it's so critical, though, that it's not just the city acting on its own. They are definitely the most vested stakeholder in this, right? Because ultimately, if they're on a downward decline financially, we saw this during the Great Recession. Some cities were talking about actually going belly up, right? Not just filing bankruptcy, like disincorporating as a city. Like there's conversations around. And so they have a vested stake in what happens with the economy, which is why they should be investing in economic development, right? Why it's important that they have good relationships, open lines of communication with their chambers of commerce, with their associations of realtors, with anyone that's a private stakeholder and a public stakeholder in their city. So, I talked about our projects, this is important to understand why real estate, what we do, is so important when we think about economic development, right? And so it creates retail, right? Retail opportunities. We're doing mixed-use projects, but that San Gabriel project that we're about to break ground on, we're looking at about 70,000 square feet of retail, right? So it creates retail, which adds to quality of life, other opportunities, home ownership opportunities, obviously, in terms of adding more units to the region, addressing the housing crisis, housing density again, as far as creating more dense housing that addresses the affordability crisis. Obviously, tax revenues that are coming out of the projects that are property tax, right? So keep in mind that when we build a new project, it gets taxed based on our construction value, which is a lot. Right? And so property tax, whether at the individual unit or individual home, et cetera, it's all very important, but it's also sales tax revenues, TOT, which is transient occupancy tax. You all stay at a hotel, you all pay a hotel tax, right? That's very important for cities. Jobs, both temporary, so construction jobs, as well as permanent jobs for the folks that are working in the stores afterward. But also these projects are catalytic, right? They're catalysts for more investment, drawing additional capital into an area. We never want our projects to just be standing alone. This is not a competition. This is actually, we're all in this together. We want more projects to be built around our projects because it's investing into the area. And guess what? The more density you have in one area, it supports the retail. Infrastructure, right? So a lot of times the burden of infrastructure to support a project is put on the developer, but we also work with the cities. They have to be able to, again, prepare the soil, make sure that they have good infrastructure to support projects. Sustainability, when I say that, I'm not just talking about financial sustainability. I'm also talking about resource sustainability, energy efficiency. And so I don't know if you all follow Cal Green Code that's come out, that's now in effect as of January 2023, which now requires our projects to include not just EV chargers, but we also have to have battery, and we also have to have solar. That all works as sort of an energy ecosystem, but it can also generate revenue for the property owner, the landlord. And then again, just attracting capital investment to them. Okay. So, I share all this because, this is kind of like the 5 tips of economic development. I share all this because on the left, right, this is where you all come in. Because again, what happens a lot of times is a city can have a vision, but if their vision is not informed by real facts, what's happening on the ground, right? What's happening in the market, what's happening with economic trends, what's happening with this type of restaurant or that type, their vision is a tunnel vision, but it's also very short-sighted. They can't see very far, right? And so again, and I'll say it again, you all have the information that cities need, that other decision makers need, because what's happening on the ground is very fun. I'll tell you, I mean, I rely heavily on our brokers, not just our listing brokers, but especially obviously if we're looking for land, right? And so when you think about real estate and these projects, new construction projects, right? Without brokers, nothing happens. It's happening at every step of the process, right? And so that's why for our project, we started from start to finish, from acquisition, working with our broker on acquiring the land, negotiating through the process, but obviously on the back end, in terms of sales, leasing, but it's not like we just work with them at the front and the end. I'm working with them all the way through. So when we talk about leasing up 70,000 square feet, or if I talk about leasing up 251 units, you know, we have to also understand what's happening market-wise, because the market probably can't absorb all 251 units at one time, right? And so we work with our brokers to understand what's happening from a data standpoint, but also, you know, they know what's happening on the ground. Cities also need to assess what they have. So again, this is like understanding their makeup and the DNA, but they also have to understand, you know, what businesses are closing, what businesses are opening, right? What's the demographic of the home buyers and the tenants that you all are working with, right? As well as understanding what's happening with the landlords. But you know, the last piece is really important. I'm going to end with this, which is identifying and finding champions in the community who can communicate the city's vision and their goals. Okay, so if you have ever thought that, well, you know, I'm just a realtor, like, what would I have to say at a city council meeting? Don't ever think that, because what you have to say is actually very, very important, right? And as an association of realtors, I would very much encourage you to start to think through your role in helping shape the direction of the economy, right, at a higher level, but also getting involved with things like your chambers of commerce, getting involved with, you know, economic development committees, right, much like I've been talking about. Yeah, so that was a lot of information, very short amount of time. I do have, it was okay with the delay. I have time for questions, so happy to answer questions. Yes.
Most of the building development in the cities in West Valley are mostly are not limited in height. It's like only 10, 15 floors, and it's mostly it's like no lateral.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why this instead of building
Vertical,
instead of building up and you said lateral, we can build vertical because, you know, we have limited space.
Yeah.
You know, the density of population increasing, and the space that is being limited right now. So is there a city regulation that cap the builders build vertical rather than lateral, or is there more economical in terms of the builders to build the lateral than the vertical?
that's a good question. Let me repeat it for the folks on Zoom. So he was asking, why are most of the projects that we see, the newer projects in the San Gabriel Valley, why are they more flat, right? Meaning, why aren't we getting more height? Why aren't they high rises, right? Much like we see in downtown LA, et cetera. There are multiple factors, and you touched on some of them, right? Number one, keep in mind, you know, you can't say that San Gabriel Valley is just suburban, because it's not, right? It's a little bit of urban suburban, but it's not quite urban, right? And so there's a community character component that comes into play where most cities in San Gabriel Valley have their ordinances, right? So they have zoning codes, which you all have to deal with all the time, but those zoning codes have development standards. And those development standards always include typically a cap on height, right? And that issue, more than traffic, tends to be a very controversial issue in almost any city, except maybe downtown LA, right? And that's because a lot of folks want to preserve their community character, which I understand, right? I live in Cerritos. Do I want a high rise right next to me? No. Is it okay a couple blocks down from me? Maybe. I don't know, right? And so that's where the planning comes into play when we talk about land use planning, how they create zones where you specifically want to allow more height. Now, traditionally, like I said, in the San Gabriel Valley, you're not going to see height limits typically more than 7 stories, right? That's still mid-rise. And 7 stories because nobody can imagine having like a 15-story or 20-story or 50-story building in San Gabriel Valley. But from the standpoint of the housing crisis, right, there is pressure on cities to review their ordinances, their zoning codes, to start to allow for more density, right? Now, look, it's very simple when you think about floor area, right? Floor area ratios, all that stuff, right? All that means is, you know, you have a piece of land, right? Depending on your setbacks, you can squish the building, right? And then you can try to cap how much square feet through floor area ratios, right? The building's going to be. But when you talk about then density and how many units they need, cities need to be re-examining, right, how they develop their development standards to allow for more height, more density. But there's a flip side to that, which is the project has to pencil, right? And so when we're looking at our pro forma, if we're purchasing land at a very high cost, which we are right now, right, then we have to be able to reach a certain density to make the project work economically, right? Which means that we have to get past a certain point, but we also have to be careful not to pass another point, because once you go past typically 7 stories, you're talking about type 1 steel construction, right? And so that gets very expensive. So if we do go above, then we got to go more, right? Because you have, it's just economies of scale. You have to make the project work. But so these conversations are happening right now. So housing elements are the housing plans that cities have to adopt, right? Every period. One second, let me just finish this thought. And so most cities so far in San Gabriel Valley haven't gotten their housing elements approved by the state. So the state has to review them. I'm saying this because right now these conversations are happening about more density, right? Because the housing elements have to say, how is my city going to accommodate for, let's say, 3,000, 5,000, 8,000 more housing units when I'm landlocked, right? And so when we think about their policy changes, they have to move in this direction. So that's a, I don't know if everybody could hear that from the mic. Are there low income, basically affordable housing projects, right? Affordable to anywhere from, keep in mind, when we talk about affordable housing, it's not just, you know, one step down from market rate housing. There's a number of categories that even the cities have to plan for. It's typically very low income to moderate income. It's based on percentage of the county median income. And keep in mind, there's also extremely low housing, right? So that's more like transitional housing, permanent supportive housing for homeless, which is very important in San Gabriel Valley, by the way. But yes, there are projects that are, and I think the question is, are the projects that are 100% affordable to lower income individuals and families? The answer is yes, but not a lot. And this is a challenge. So I spoke recently in December at a housing summit that was hosted by the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership. It was at Pacific Palms. It was well attended. There were a number of real estate folks that were there. But you know, the challenge in San Gabriel Valley is that we're a little bit behind the curve in terms of, one, developing resources to help facilitate affordable housing, but two, we haven't really attracted that many kind of higher level affordable housing developers, right? And so I actually did a search of a lot of affordable housing developers. And I'm talking about these guys, all they do is affordable housing, all day long. That's all they do, okay? But you have to also understand how difficult it is to build affordable housing. And so they have to cobble together usually 10 different financing sources. And sometimes, at least in the old days, even the cities would put money, right? But these are competitive, sometimes tax credit allocations that they have to secure. And if they can't secure it, guess what? They got to wait for the next cycle. And so it is a very difficult industry to be in, but it's absolutely critical. We need more affordable housing. We're not affordable housing developers, but what you're seeing with some cities now, and this again, San Gabriel Valley is behind the curve because in other parts of the state, they've been more proactive at the city level of adopting inclusionary housing ordinances, where let's say I build a 100-unit project, then 15%, it varies, 15% of those units have to be affordable to low and moderate income individuals and families. So 15 units, right? Or I can, instead of building those, I can pay an in lieu fee into a fund, which is usually a housing trust fund. Those funds should be used by the cities and to purchase land, even if it's extraordinarily high, and then basically write down the value of that land and sometimes sell it for $1 to an affordable housing developer because they need affordable housing. So these conversations are all happening right now. A lot of cities are adopting these ordinances. Alhambra adopted theirs last year. San Gabriel is in conversations right now. So a lot of cities are in those discussions. I'm okay on time if you guys have more questions.
I have my observation and views of working in construction is, as you mentioned, for the rich people or investors who have money, they can put in the project that they do. And affordable housing is the ability, it's a very hard number to walk through. And if the government, let's say, mandate 10 or 15%, I come with the projects, they say this over 4 years you build one has to be affordable. So that's okay. But that's still a long list of housing shortage. And then now they have, I don't know, 80, 9, 10. But the problem with those things doesn't seem to be attractive for people to go forward taking advantage of the regulation.
The question was, are we doomed? Sorry, I was supposed to advance it. Hold on. Oh, you know what? Oh, it was the other version. That's okay. So there was context to the question, are we doomed? His question was really about the housing crisis, right? And, when we think about SB 9 and the ADU ordinances, et cetera, everything that's going on, and trust me, it's more than a dozen bills that have been passed just in the last 7 years. We've even been taking advantage of one of them. Some of you may have heard about AB 2011, SB 6. Those were both passed this past year. And we're not seeing a lot of people take advantage of them. But the whole point is Sacramento is telling cities, get out of the way, right? You're getting in the way of housing production because, people are fighting over traffic, height, all these issues. And then the city councils or planning commission city councils sometimes either downsize a project or deny it altogether, right? And so what have we been seeing? SB 330, SB 35, AB 2011, SB 6, all these bills say you cannot deny this project if it meets certain criteria. Okay, and so for affordable housing, there is a new legislation that says you can build affordable housing by right in a commercial zone if you meet certain parameters. Okay, so I've told cities, hey, don't be scared, right? Because a lot of cities got scared of SB 9. You guys all saw that, right? They started preemptively trying to fend off SB 9 and just basically made it impossible, right? By doing other things to pinch setback standards, everything else. It's it'd be impossible to do it basically, right? And there's litigation around that too. But what happens going forward though, in terms of how cities react is they should be proactive. They need to, it's easy for me to say, but they do need to embrace it and say, this is a fact, it's a reality. At least let me direct the developers to the locations where I want commercial zones to have housing, right? Incentivize it, streamline it, make it easier, right? Otherwise, if you're in a difficult city and I have a by right, permission to build wherever I want, I'm not going to care. I'm not going to talk to the community. I'm not going to talk to the city. I'm just going to do whatever I want. That is not what cities want. That's not what communities want. They should be being more proactive and directing the traffic, right? The investment to a certain area. I didn't answer your question, are we doomed? That was more my morning session with the economic forecast. There's an economist that talked about there's a basically an age gap, right? We have an increasing population of aging individuals 65 and up, but then when you see, so they're leaving the workforce. We all know that, boomers, right? But when you see basically the 18 to 24 band of young professionals that should be entering the workforce, it's not matching, right? And so it's more flat while the boomers retiring is going up, and so you have a gap. You take that and you mix it with this issue around housing, and you have a problem, right? Because I'm bracing for, I'll send the kids to college. They're probably coming back, right? Because there's an affordability issue. There's not enough housing, right? So no, I don't think we're doomed. I think we're going to struggle. I think cities are going to continue to get more legislation from Sacramento saying, get out of the way. But I think we have to work and support our cities. We have to help them shape policies. We also have to be supportive around their business development efforts, economic development. We have to support our chambers of commerce, work with them, even if you don't want to, right? And we have to support organizations like this, the associations of realtors. If that's it, I want to thank you all for inviting me.
Many thanks to informative presentation today. And there are more classes and seminars coming up. And tomorrow, the 15th, CRMLS, the virtual training. On the 17th, 45-hour CRE license review continuation application. And on the 21st, we can learn home warranty. Thanks again. And we also thanks for Judy Chow. He sponsored today's lunch. Will you come up and speak a little bit? A few words. And later on, we will have a good picture.
Thank you very much. To sponsor lunch today, so I made a sandwich. But people have there's lots of sandwiches, so and I do mostly the loan industry for over 30 years, and we also do commercial loans. Please contact me. And on behalf of West San Diego Valley Realtors, we send the certificate of appreciation to Ken.